American businesses across sectors and industries are not being able to operate at full steam because they do not have enough workers. And in turn, this labor shortage has produced a cascading effects across the economy, like food inflation, which, if I'm not mistaken, rose to 9% over the last 12 months, lost opportunities for companies who are forced to operate in suboptimal conditions, and problems with supply chains, which are slowing the economic growth of the United States. And we all know who could fill those vacancies, tackle the demographic deficit, and help America trigger its full economic potential. And that is immigrants.
Welcome to another episode of Immigration and Mobility Decoded, a podcast about business immigration and global mobility. We have a great episode ahead for everyone, and joining me today, as always, is Finn. Finn, how are things going?
Doing good, Eric. Busy news day for sure on this Monday, May 1st.
Yes, it is the 1st of May, somehow, some way. Finn, I think let's just hop right into it and recap some of that busy news. Friday, Wall Street Journal, Michelle Hackman reported some pretty big news regarding the H-1B visa lottery. Finn, break it down for us.
Yeah, we covered this in a video that we released on Friday with Addie Hogan, who's a founding partner at Corporate Immigration Partners, and her colleague Ryan Harris, who's a supervising attorney also at Corporate Immigration Partners. But essentially what happened is USCIS released the registration numbers for the H-1B lottery on Friday, and they gave a sneak peek of that to Michelle Hackman at the Wall Street Journal. And the revelation from these numbers is, one, there were 781,000 registrations in this year's H-1B cap lottery, which is an astounding number. Last year, there were 483,000. And I'll just remind the audience that there's only 85,000 slots, H-1B slots available each year. So the revelation number one was that big number of registrations, 781,000. But in between the lines on that, USCIS also released or also unveiled that about 400 plus thousand of those registrations were duplicates. So it was an individual who had more than one registration submitted for them by multiple companies, which is technically allowed under the rules. And Addie and Ryan from CIP lay out that what that means in the video, which again I recommend everyone watch. But it is big news, and it's sort of leaves a bunch of questions on the table as to what happens from here. What's the future of the H-1B lottery going to be like? Are the people who are only are the companies that are submitting, a registration for just one individual, are they getting a fair shake in the lottery? Or is this gaming of the system a potential issue? And right now the government's investigating the companies that supposedly, allegedly, I should say, colluded, in their words, to submit multiple registrations for the same individuals.
Awesome. Thanks for that recap, Finn. And we can include the video as well as that Wall Street Journal article in the show notes or YouTube description, depending on where you're watching. Finn, question for you. So I feel like this was a concern when USCIS initially rolled out electronic registration. They talked about it, I think, in the winter of 2019, but it wasn't first implemented until the 2020, March of 2020 H-1B cap season for fiscal year 2021. So what are you hearing, and what did Ryan and Addie say regarding like the barrier of entry? Because it's $10 to submit a registration. Were they expecting this, and are they surprised by it?
Yeah, I think a lot of immigration attorneys in the space were expecting this. Our audience might recall that 2 weeks ago we released an episode, and at the end we had a short conversation with Ian Love, who's an attorney at Global Immigration Associates, and he predicted exactly this: that there would be 700,000 to 800,000 registrations this year. This is before USCIS released the numbers, and that there would probably be a large amount of duplicate registrations as more and more companies get comfortable with this electronic registration process. We actually, we revert back to this all the time on the podcast, but Envoy's Immigration Trend Survey earlier this year asked companies what they would do in response to USCIS increasing the registration fee Eric, like you said, from $10 to $215 per registration.
Hmm.
Um, and the results from the survey, again, of 500 plus US companies of all sizes based around the country, the majority of them said they would file or submit either the same or more registrations in next year's lottery. So it doesn't seem like the monetary, it doesn't seem like the increase in cost in the fee is going to stop companies from,
Right.
submitting multiple registrations for the same employee. So it's, up in the air what the government's going to do to combat this
Yeah.
or to address this to make sure that
Yeah.
the process is fair.
Right. And with the fee increase looming on the horizon and referencing the number of employers who said they will still pay for electronic registration, again, it just goes to show that the demand to fill high skilled talent, fill those high skilled jobs is still there. So Finn, I know you said right now that it remains up in the air of what the government will do, but I mean, any initial thoughts on what they could do, other than just currently investigate what's going on?
I mean, there's a lot of ideas out there in the think tank world, right? Like different researchers of immigration policy have varying solutions to this problem. Some of which would require Congress, others would could in theory be could be enacted by USCIS or by the Biden administration unilaterally. I think for us, we should definitely have some guests on in the future to ask them about their proposed solutions to this problem, because it's certainly
Yeah.
going to be a hot topic. I know that there's a lot of folks who are frustrated by this news, who if they didn't get selected in the lottery, or if their employees, if they're working for a company, if their employees didn't get selected in the lottery, they're frustrated and feel like maybe they were cheated out.
Hmm.
So it's going to be a hot topic for weeks and months to come until USCIS releases more information. I should note, though, I mean, we've been talking about this for a few weeks, and we were wondering why USCIS was taking so long to release the registration numbers, and now we know
Now we
why.
know. Now we
Yeah,
know. Yeah, they were investigating some deeper issues. And yeah, more to come. We'll keep everyone posted. Um, so Finn, Michelle Hackman broke this news. Any other immigration journalists or reporters that you recommend following to stay on top of some of this breaking news coverage?
for sure. Yeah, that was a big one. Andrew Craybaum over at Bloomberg Law also released a piece today. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce and other business associations from around the country sent a letter to Congress today urging them to pass immigration legislation that would solve issues at the border with employment-based immigration, both high-skilled and low-skilled, permanent protection for dreamers, et cetera. We'll link that in the show notes and in the description here
Nice.
for people to read. But there's definitely some pressure being put on the government right now by employers to address these immigration issues that are really having some on the ground impacts for individuals, companies, organizations, et cetera.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think speaking of immigration legislation, that's a perfect segue to our guest that will be coming up. We recently spoke with Arturo Castellanos from the National Immigration Forum, and he had a lot to say about legislation, advocating for immigration reform. We hit on Dreamers. Finn, what else stood out to you about our conversation with Arturo?
I mean, Arturo is a super sharp guy. He's an immigrant himself.
Hmm.
So he's been going through the immigration system while he's been advocating and researching U.S. immigration policy and all of its strengths and weaknesses. So I think that kind of brings a unique perspective to the conversation that maybe doesn't get heard enough. But really, if you're interested in what's going on in D.C., at the in immigration policy or in legislative conversations around immigration reform, Arturo is the guy to follow.
Hmm.
The National Immigration Forum's legislative bulletin is a great resource that summarizes very complex, long-winded, and often redundant pieces of legislation that Congress people introduce on immigration.
You find legislation redundant?
It's quite ridiculous. They never taught brevity to
Yeah.
any of the writers of legislation for whatever reason.
Yeah, I'm always amazed because growing up as a kid, or I guess even as a teen and young adult, uh, when you take a peek at some like old pieces of legislation, and it's all the way it's written, it's always super formal. And for some reason, I always thought like, oh, maybe it'll change with the times. But nope, you take a look at legislation that's passed last year and it's still written in that same convoluted way.
It's funny. It's like the Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence together were like 800 words.
Yeah.
Every bill that's been passed in the last 5 years, like, are, tens of thousands of pages long. So
yeah. Yep. Anyway, that conversation with Arturo will be coming up in just a moment. Finn, any other final words before we hop into that conversation?
No, just excited to share the conversation with Arturo, and we'll keep everyone posted on the H-1B cap lottery updates. And just one more time, go ahead and check out that video with Addie and Ryan. Again, we'll link it in the description.
Totally. And before we hop into that conversation, just a quick reminder that if you are watching on YouTube, definitely would appreciate a like and subscribe to our channel so you can stay on top of future immigration developments, such as any updates regarding this H-1B lottery news. And if you're listening on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts, would definitely appreciate a follow. And with that, our conversation with Arturo Castellanos.
Arturo, welcome.
Thank you very much, Finn. How are you?
We're doing well. We're really happy to have you on the show and really excited to dive into your experience and your work. And just want to kick it off with sort of a first question here. You're an immigrant yourself to the United States, and you work in immigration advocacy and policy research. Tell us about your path, your experience coming here as an immigrant, and how you got into that field.
Of course. Well, what can I say? First of all, hi, Eric, for you as well.
Hey, Arturo, nice.
Wonderful. Sorry. But for me, it's been a wonderful experience. Honestly, I have to say it's the best decision in my life. 7 years ago, my wife and I moved from Mexico City to the United States for graduate school. And the original plan was to stay just for 2 years, head back to Mexico. But we fell in love with the country, a country that luckily has welcomed us with arms wide open to both of us. And it's a place where we have been able to fulfill some of our personal, academic, professional dreams. And in 7 years, we have lived in 3 incredible, awesome cities like Ithaca in upstate New York, Washington, D.C., and now in Atlanta. So that's my general experience as an immigrant in the United States. And what brought me to advocacy? Well, as I told you, 7 years ago, when I first moved to the United States, I moved during a presidential campaign. And one of the candidates was referring to Mexican nationals as criminals and rapists. And I felt frustrated that I couldn't participate and voice my concerns. And so during grad school, I decided that I wanted to write something about the right to vote and hold office as an immigrant in the United States, particularly because in the United States, 7% of the population is non-citizen. So you had 21 million people watching from the sidelines, an election that had a big impact in their personal lives, in their careers. So I thought, imagine 7% of a population that is disfranchised. There must be some legal, philosophical, even historical arguments to discuss this topic. So I decided to apply for one of the 2 available positions for the doctorate in juridical science, JSD. Luckily, I was admitted, wrote my dissertation about the right of suffrage of non-citizens. And so I started engaging in doing some research, reading many books. And one of the previous CEO and president of the National Immigration Forum, Ali Noorani, he went to Cornell to present his book, There Goes the Neighborhood. I strongly recommend reading it. And I was fascinated by what he was saying. So I devoured his book, bought his book, devoured it, and started following the work of the National Immigration Forum. So when I graduated, I thought, this is where I would love to work. And luckily, there was an available position. I applied, and it's been 2 years since I've been working at the National Immigration Forum. And let me tell you, I couldn't be happier with the work that we're doing.
As a native of the northeastern part of the United States, I will say it's only an immigrant's optimism that would say a city like Ithaca, New York is a wonderful place.
Uh,
ask anyone living there in January. If it's a wonderful place.
I will go with a cliche, but Ithaca is always gorgeous.
Well, that leads me to my next question. Of the cities you've lived in or are currently living in, outside of your work at the National Immigration Forum, what are you and your fiance? Is it fiance or wife?
Wife.
Congratulations!
Yeah,
What?
next year's 7th anniversary.
All right.
Sorry, next month's 7th anniversary.
Love to hear that. Well, what do you guys get up to for fun in cities like Atlanta and DC?
Well, I'm about to reveal perhaps a state secret. This is a state secret for the people in DC, and my friends will get upset, but I'm about to tell you what our favorite secret place is. And perhaps it's not that secret. It's been there for always. But Hades in Mount Pleasant is just an amazing place. It's this Salvadoran karaoke bar. Don't expect much from it. I mean, if you look at it from the outside, it just looks like a regular place. But inside Hades, only magic happens. It's great. You get to sing all the traditional songs from Latin America, from the U.S. People singing in Spanish, in English, in French. That's where we had our goodbye party from Washington D.C. So if any of our listeners is heading to Washington D.C., make sure to go to Hades in Mount Pleasant. Honestly, will be the best decision in your lives. And here in Atlanta, I'm I don't know about you guys, what you did during the pandemic to stay active. Some people did jigsaw puzzles, other people started doing Peloton. I became a home brewer, and so I started brewing my beers. It became one of my passions, and luckily Atlanta is full of breweries, of local breweries. And so far, I still have a long list to explore, but so far my favorite is one called Halfway Crooks. Incredible beers, German style beers. If you're here in Atlanta, go to Halfway Crooks.
For your home brews, are you what do you like to brew? Like pilsners, lagers? Are you an IPA person?
Yeah. Listen, in 34 years of life, I haven't tried a beer that I don't like, so I'll drink them all. But in terms of brewing, I started brewing pretty recently, and I have only tried 3 different recipes. The one that never disappoints are amber ales. They're easy for everyone, easy on the palate. I also did a stout, which was outstanding. I have to tell it. It was really, really good. And I also tried a Hefeweizen, which didn't disappoint. So those are the beers that I've been brewing since the pandemic.
That's awesome. Yeah, like you said,
next time I see you, I'll give you one, and you can judge by yourself.
I mean, like you're just saying, I don't think there's a beer I've ever had that I didn't like. There's very, very few beers that I don't like. Arturo, can you tell us a little bit more about the National Immigration Forum and what work the organization does on immigration policy and advocacy?
Of course. I mean, we have the formal description of who we are, but let me tell you that in essence, we are a bunch of 40 optimistic and tireless people who work hard every day to find new arguments to convince members of Congress and the American people about the benefits of migration to the country. You could say that we specialize at the National Immigration Forum in identifying unexpected allies in our advocacy efforts. What I mean is that we focus our efforts on center-right groups, people who, for one reason or another, are on the conservative side of the spectrum, but who understand the critical importance of improving our immigration system for economic reasons or to strengthen the country's social tissue. So we focus on what we call the triple B, Bibles, Badges, and Businesses. So we focus our efforts on business leaders, people who are experiencing labor shortages and understand the importance of bringing in more immigrants. We engage with faith leaders, people who are seeing their congregations shrink in recent years. And also because the message of faith leaders is a message of love, and they want to welcome their neighbors, regardless of where they come from. And we also engage with law enforcement leaders and national security leaders, because these are people who understand that in order for a society to function, the communities they serve, they need to trust their authorities, regardless of their immigration status. And immigrants are essential to solidify America's global competitiveness. So those are the focus. That's the focus of the work that we do at the National Immigration Forum.
Arturo, you spoke earlier this year at Georgetown University on how immigration can help fix America's labor shortage. And I think when folks in the audience might hear America's labor shortage, there might be some confusion. And I'm not an economist; I don't pretend to be. But there is a weird disparity between lots of folks getting laid off and looking for jobs in certain sectors, but there being severe labor shortages in other sectors. In your view, how does immigration factor into the current U.S. labor shortages, and what solutions can be implemented at the policy level to bridge these employment gaps?
That's a great question, Finn. And if you're about to get off this podcast and not listen to the rest, just listen to this. And I want to be very clear and emphatic. The full economic potential of the United States can only be achieved with the help of immigrants, right? So that's the message that I want to give you throughout this whole 30 or 45 minutes of our conversation. And as you said, unfortunately, in recent years, the United States has not been able to operate at full steam due to our outdated immigration laws and policies. There is an acute labor shortage in the United States. In the last 23, 24 months or so, job vacancies have consistently surpassed 10 million, while the number of hires average only around 6 million. In other words, there are only 6 workers available for every 10 job openings. And to be fair, the root cause of the labor shortage is multifactorial. But Finn, we must pay attention to 2 factors that combined have severely accentuated the workforce deficit. On the one hand, in 2021, net international migration to the US hit its lowest level in decades. Only 247,000 people were added to the US population. To give you an idea, that is only a fourth of pre-pandemic levels. And on the other hand, also in 2021, the US population, which is dramatically aging, grew at the lowest rate in its history. It grew only 0.1%. So what's the consequence of these 2 factors combined? A severe contraction of the workforce. So American businesses across sectors and industries are not being able to operate at full steam because they do not have enough workers. And in turn, this labor shortage has produced a cascading effects across the economy, like food inflation, which, if I'm not mistaken, rose to 9% over the last 12 months, lost opportunities for companies who are forced to operate in suboptimal conditions, and problems with supply chains, which are slowing the economic growth of the United States. And we all know who could fill those vacancies, tackle the demographic deficit, and help America trigger its full economic potential. And that is immigrants, And if you don't mind me asking Finn and Eric, do you guys like Formula One racing?
I follow it loosely. I wouldn't say
I've dabbled with it. I watched a little bit of the Netflix documentary.
Well, if you want to get hooked to Formula One, I was going to say watch Drive to Survive on Netflix. It's a phenomenal show. And I'm asking because if you allow me, I would like to make an analogy between immigration and Formula One.
Go for it.
So imagine that the United States has the fastest car of all, designed by experts for decades to go faster than the rest of the opponents. So the car is America's economy, okay? And our car is driven by a world-class pilot who is fearless and drives aggressively and does everything he can to bring the car to its full potential, right? That let's assume would be the president, regardless of the political party, name, or denomination. It doesn't matter. Now, in the middle of the race, even though we have the best car with the best engine, the coolest design, the pilot sees the car behind growing larger in its mirrors. It is getting closer and closer. And unless our team does something, that car will overtake us sooner or later. Now, our car has been doing many laps without a pit stop. So everyone knows that the car needs fresh tires, So the pilot calls the pit crew and he says, "Hey guys, I'm losing speed. We need fresh tires." In this case, the pit crew is Congress, okay? And the pit crew knows, like everyone else, that the car needs fresh tires for maximum performance and win the race. But instead of ordering a pit stop to solve the problem, they start debating among themselves endlessly the type of tires that the car needs. Some in the pit crew argue that they need to fix the boiler first, while the vast majority of the team and everyone knows that the car simply needs fresh tires to help the car fly, reach its full potential, leave the rest of the cars behind. So is that too much to ask? I mean, honestly, if you're listening to this podcast, please tell the pit crew that we need fresh tires to operate at full performance.
So Arturo, I think I love that analogy. How does the National Immigration Forum and the work that you do, when you reach out to congressmen or congresspeople, senators, and other government officials, how do they kind of absorb the information and the case that you and the organization are making?
Members of Congress, regardless of the party where they're coming from, they're all experiencing labor shortages in their districts and states. So they understand the importance of immigration for the country. What we're trying to do at the National Immigration Forum is bringing in these constituencies that are conservative leaning or center conservative leaning to show them that if they support immigration policies in the United States, they wouldn't lose the votes of those constituencies. On the contrary, 75%, 80% of the population of the United States, according to recent polls that we have done at the National Immigration Forum, say that they would support improving the immigration system of the United States. So that's the work that we're trying to do, trying to engage with members of Congress and with constituencies who are unexpected allies in our advocacy efforts.
I think it says something too that when you look at the history of immigration reform here in the United States, the last major immigration reform was under President Reagan in the 80s. So,
yeah, just imagine. I mean, it was 1986 exactly. Maradona was the best soccer player in the world, lifting the trophy in Mexico City as a World Cup champion. The Cold War was still going on. There weren't any, Zoom communications. There were no podcasts. So yeah, completely different world with completely different needs. And the United States is in urgent need of an immigration reform.
Well, one need that hasn't changed since 1986 and probably never will is that of the food that all of us find in our refrigerator, on our tables. And most of us probably don't recognize that there's a pretty good chance that an immigrant or a migrant worker, either here permanently or temporarily, contributed to that food getting to our table. Arturo, you've written about the importance of immigration to agriculture, which is a critical sector, right, in the American economy. There are very few sectors that are any more critical than food, right? What role does immigration policy play in the agricultural industry? And how does the current H-2A visa system, and I'll let you explain what that is if you like, how is that working for farmers and for agricultural companies?
It's not working. Let's leave it there. It's not working. And where do I start? I mean, no other economic sector depends as much on immigrants as agriculture. Immigrants make up 73% of farm workers in the country. In other words, immigrant farm workers are the pillars of America's food self-sufficiency, and they also help the United States be the largest exporter of food in the world. However, the current immigration laws that allow employers to bring immigrant farm workers to the country are so outdated and so out of touch with the needs and the pace of the market that farmers and ranchers who are struggling to hire workers are forced to choose between cutting production, losing their crops, or hiring undocumented immigrants. And as a result, 48% of the farming workforce in the United States at this point is undocumented, around 48%. So I don't know how this makes you feel, but to think that 48% of the farming workforce is at the same time essential and undocumented is an irony that cannot continue. And also, this shortage of agricultural workers is rapidly increasing food pricing and jeopardizing America's food self-sufficiency. Listen to this and you will be surprised, as surprised as I was when I discovered this. But approximately 1/3 of edible produce remains unharvested in the United States due to several factors, including labor shortages. And if I may, the problem is not limited to agriculture. There are essential industries that heavily rely on the immigrant workforce that are experiencing a significant labor deficit due to outdated immigration laws that make it very difficult for employers to hire immigrants. Take the STEM sector, for instance. 25% of all workers in the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics sectors are immigrants. And worryingly, STEM job openings in the country outnumber qualified workers by around 3 million, according to the International Monetary Fund. So we need strategies to attract and retain more immigrants to tackle the labor shortage in the STEM sector. Now, let's move to another sector. America's healthcare industry is also heavily dependent on immigrants, and there is a worrying shortage. Immigrants make up as much as 28% of physicians and surgeons, and worryingly, there is a shortage of healthcare workers, and it is expected to get worse in the next year. So, according to recent calculations, we should expect a physician shortage of between 54,000 to 140,000 by 2033. So we need to start acting now and bring in more immigrants to tackle the labor shortages being experienced in all these sectors. So in short, increasing immigration levels to the United States is an economic imperative. And guess what? Immigrants not only, and this is something perhaps that is not being discussed much by advocacy groups or the media, but immigrants not only fill vacancies, but they also create new jobs, right? Immigrants run 28% of all Main Street businesses, such as gas stations, grocery stores, laundromats, restaurants. Immigrant households, they earn around $1.5 trillion. That gives them significant spending power that helps local economies. They also pay more than $300 billion in federal, state, local taxes. So again, I want to be as emphatic as possible. Immigrants bring prosperity to the United States.
No, it's fascinating. I think those connections that you were making between, immigration and the average life of anyone who lives in America are something that, most people don't see, right? But when you pull back the veil, you realize, oh, my food prices are going up because it's hard for farmers to hire workers. And there's plenty of immigrants who are willing to do the work, but there's a red tape system that's preventing them from doing so. Or, you don't realize that if you're having trouble finding a doctor, which most people are these days, right? It's very difficult to get in, even for just an initial appointment with a general practitioner. Well, there's a reason for that. There aren't enough doctors, and there are plenty of, immigrants who would come in and fill those gaps. So I think making those connections is super important, because most people don't realize that their daily lives are impacted by immigration policy or the lack thereof. And speaking of that, Arturo, you are a key player in the National Immigration Forum's weekly legislative bulletin newsletter that you send out. Eric and I are both big fans of that newsletter, avid readers, because there's a lot of new legislation that's being introduced or reintroduced in the halls of Congress and the House and the Senate to try to fix some of these problems in the immigration system, but few seem to ever make it through the fray. So in your mind, in 2023, what issue that you've laid out today in the American immigration system has the best chance of seeing some sort of fix in Congress in the next year or so?
The $1 million question, Finn. And let me just start by saying that I'm glad that the legislative bulletin is landing on the right hands, because it does require a lot of work, and knowing that it's helping others do the work, it makes us happy. After almost 2 years of writing the legislative bulletin, I am now the last pair of eyes before posting it. The person doing the heavyweight now, who is a phenomenal writer, it's my colleague, Ali Villarreal. She's a marvelous writer. But yeah, we are in the business of hope, Finn. So, and as I told you, I'm an optimistic person by nature. So I do see some of the bills introduced this Congress with the potential to move forward, particularly because, as I said, every time we meet with members of Congress from both parties, we hear how they are dealing in their districts and states with labor shortages. And they all understand the importance of immigration. In the Senate, for instance, there is the Conrad State 30 and Physician Access Reauthorization Act. This is a bipartisan bill that would allow international doctors to remain in the United States after they complete their residency, under the condition that they practice in areas experiencing doctor shortages. So a common sense bill that hopefully it's bipartisan, and hopefully we can see it move forward. In the House, for instance, there is the Eliminating Backlogs Act, which is a bipartisan bill that would recapture the unused employment-based green cards accumulated since 1992, and it would exempt them from the 7% per country cap. And listen, for me and for many in the United States, perhaps the most important bill is without a doubt the DREAM Act. Introduced by Senators Graham and Durbin, this is a bill that would provide Dreamers with protection from deportation and an opportunity to obtain legal status if they meet certain requirements. As you all know, as your listeners know, Dreamers are these undocumented immigrants who were brought to the United States as children and have lived in the U.S. for most of their lives. So this bill would allow approximately 1.9 million Dreamers to receive permanent protections to live and work in the United States. So when you ask, do I see any bills moving this year? I want to say yes. I do see potential in these bills, and let me promise that we won't drop the towel until we see solutions coming from Congress.
You just mentioned Dreamers, Arturo, and as you know, I think we're expecting a ruling from the Supreme Court sometime in June regarding the DACA program. How is your organization preparing and helping Dreamers prepare for a ruling that I think amongst us three and maybe the general public, just given the makeup of the Supreme Court, we might have an inside sense of how they might rule? But how is your organization working with Dreamers and just communicating what might happen come June?
Thank you, Reagan. And that's that imminent resolution on the legality of DACA is creating a sense of urgency in Congress. The economy of this country heavily relies on the work of Dreamers, and protecting Dreamers is not just an economic factor to consider. They are essential to their congregations, their communities, their families. They've been living in this country for so many years, so it's only a matter of common sense. They were raised and educated in American schools. They are doing great jobs in all fields. So this imminent ruling is creating a sense of urgency, and we're trying to transmit this urgency to Congress to act. DACA was a great way to solve a problem temporarily, but we require Congress to act on it and give some certainty to the almost 2 million Dreamers who live in the United States.
So on continuing on the topic of legislation and things that you're hopeful on, out of curiosity, do you or does the National Immigration Forum look at? Is there a preference of changes being made to the immigration system? A couple of months ago, Envoy Global released the 2023 Immigration Trends Report, and one of the questions was asking respondents of who do you prefer to make changes to the immigration system? And the numbers escaping me off the top of my head. Finn probably has it. But actually, a good chunk of people, said executive action. So, the president or those agencies. If legislation isn't viable, how do you prefer to see changes to the immigration system made? Are you on board with president utilizing executive actions, USCIS introducing new rules, and et cetera?
Let me go back to the Formula One analogy. We want a pilot who drives as aggressively and as fast as possible with all the resources that he or she has at their disposal. But at some point, there are some limitations by law that the president can and cannot do. So we need the pit crew to start sending fresh tires to allow the president and the administration, executive branch in turn, to do its best. But yes, the mission of the National Immigration Forum is to advocate for the value of immigrants to the country, regardless of where those solutions come from, whether it's from Congress, from administrative action, or even from the judiciary. We are here to support and advocate for the value of immigrants and all the great things that they do for our country.
Got it. So Arturo, what is the perspective of Mexico and other countries in Latin America on U.S. immigration policy? How do these countries approach their own economic migration and asylum and refugee policies?
Um, well, it depends perhaps on each country. Each country has its own policies and ideas, but migration is among the top priorities for all countries in the Americas from multiple perspectives. The vast majority of countries in the hemisphere are countries of origin when we talk about immigration. Many people in the region migrate to the United States in search of a better life. There are countries like Guatemala, for instance, where 8% of its population lives in the United States. 8%. And when you ask about Mexico, there are around 11 million Mexican-born Mexicans living in the United States these days. And that is the case for many countries in the continent. And these diasporas have become critical economic agents for their countries. The money that migrant workers send to support their families in their home countries is known as remittances. And Mexico, for instance, the third largest remittance receiving country in the world, received $58 billion in remittances in 2022. That represents around 6% of the country's GDP. That's how important that is. Other countries with smaller economies are even more dependent on remittances. For example, El Salvador received $6 billion in remittances in 2020, and that represented 24% of its GDP. So that's how important migration is for many of the countries of the hemisphere. So for many of these governments, finding legal migration pathways to the United States and Canada is an economic imperative. Interestingly, there is a recent shift in migration trends, and countries that used to be countries of origin or transit have become the final destination for many migrants. In 2021, Mexico became the third largest recipient of asylum claims in the world. Costa Rica is by far the largest recipient of Nicaraguan asylees. Colombia is the largest recipient of Venezuelan refugees. So the asylum systems of these countries at the moment are overstretched and underfunded. And that has created lots of problems that in some cases have been fatal, such as the tragic fire in Ciudad Juarez in the state of Chihuahua in Mexico last month. So it is essential to follow closely the policies of these countries and help them in any way possible.
Arturo, a lot of your work centers around U.S. refugee and asylum policy. In your eyes, what are the key factors impacting the current climate around refugee and asylum policy that most of America should know about, but perhaps doesn't, given how the issue is covered?
Well, this is something that I find particularly frustrating. I feel frustrated that some people don't understand the symbiotic nature of the asylum system. The United States benefits as much from refugees as refugees benefit from finding a safe refuge in the US. Remember that this country is in a perpetual race and it urgently needs fresh tires to reach maximum performance. Asylum seekers, refugees, and migrants, we all want to contribute to maintain the US global competitiveness. So, for me at least, the words that best describe asylum seekers and refugees in the United States are grit and perseverance. And I constantly say this because these are people who came to the United States to work hard. They have endured hard conditions in their countries of origin, terrifying conditions in many cases in their transit to the United States, and they still want to come here and work for the country. So if you were an employer, wouldn't you like to hire people who have demonstrated grit and perseverance? So that's what I think we're not being clear on shifting the narrative about the symbiotic nature of asylum seekers. We're talking about labor shortages in the country, and on the one hand, and on the other hand, we have lots of people who want urgently to come here and work in the United States. It's only logical to allow them through creating legal pathways to come to the United States to do exactly that.
Arturo, taking it back to, I don't want to say economic migration or economic immigration, because I feel like at some degree all forms of immigration are economic, but the U.S. immigration system has visas that are specific for to come here to work, right? And one of those visas is the TN. And that's essentially a visa that was created through trade agreements, right? That allows Mexican and Canadian nationals to enter the US. And what's most fascinating to me about the TN visa is that there's no cap on it. So unlike the H-1B, where every year, there's a lottery and there's only 85,000 coveted slots, and usually there's, at best a 1 in 4, 1 in 5 chance to even be considered, to even have your application considered for an H-1B. A TN is just, you follow the requirements and you get approved and you're able to come and work in the US. What role do you think, especially in the Western Hemisphere, these trade agreement adjacent visas that are capless might have in the future of our immigration policy? Are they being underutilized? Could companies, businesses, and policymakers maybe lean more heavily on these visas than they have in the past?
It's interesting that you asked, because I feel frustrated sometimes that we're not talking enough about the relevance of TN visas. There might be many people, many of your listeners who work in the HR offices of your businesses. TN visa is a phenomenal visa. It's a visa that works. It's a visa that brings in Canadian and Mexican nationals who have professional degrees. And I know, so when you ask, is it being used? Yes. Many of my friends and even family members, the first step that they used to come to the United States was through a TN visa. There's lots to learn, and this type of visa is so important for the United States that even though it was created, as you said, in 1994 with NAFTA, the North America Free Trade Agreement, even when the Trump administration renegotiated the trade agreement with Canada and Mexico and turned it into the USMCA, they kept that chapter about TN visa where they didn't remove a single comma. And that's because, and people didn't talk much about it, but it's a great way to celebrate the friendship between two nations, allowing people to freely move from one country to another to work where they are most needed.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating because Mexico has, I'm telling you something you probably already know, but has one of the fastest growing demographics of high skilled talent in the world, right? And it's right there on the southern border of the United States. And obviously the border, there's a lot of, news coverage about what goes on at the border. But I think it's probably underrepresented and underreported, how much high skilled labor flows happen between the U.S. and Mexican borders.
That's a good point. And contrary to what the United States is experiencing, a labor shortage due to an aging population, Mexico has a robust demographic dividend. When you look at Mexico's demographic pyramid, it still looks like a pyramid compared to the United States that looks, I don't know what it looks like, but it doesn't look like a pyramid anymore. And so Mexico is facing unemployment. So you have these talented young people with degrees, as you said, Finn, who want to work somewhere, and the United States, on the other hand, has these labor shortages. So it's a great way to bring in more Mexicans and Canadians to work here in the country.
If you were to create an ideal visa to bring more talent into the U.S., what would that visa look like?
Great question. And for me, it's been difficult to stay in the United States. I came with an F1 visa as a student. Then when I transitioned to the doctorate, I jumped to a J visa. Then my wife started doing a doctorate. So when my J1 ended, I decided to jump and become her dependent. So I've become this visa acrobat, jumping from one visa to another. It's exhausting, it's costly, it's frustrating. So having an opportunity, we came here to do a master's, then a doctorate, both of us, and we're struggling to stay in the United States, right? And the only reason why we have been able to stay is because we are Mexicans and we are eligible for this TN visa. So having something like a TN visa, but for all, I'm not sure it's for all, but for extended to more nationalities, that would be fantastic.
Arturo, everything you've brought to the table today has been super fascinating. I imagine in our show notes, we're going to have a long list of your research and the research you referenced that we're going to need to include for the audience to click in and do some research on their own. But before we wrap up here in the next few minutes, are there any topics that we haven't hit on in the conversation that relate to your work or just your view on immigration policy?
Well, every time I have these opportunities, and thank you very much for having me and creating these windows to discuss very important issues for the United States, I try to say that it's important to understand that the world is going through a period of geopolitical change. The pandemic, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and the steady growth of China have put the United States under significant pressure. So these are shifting global dynamics that have catapulted the world into a period where, in Darwinian terms, only the most adaptable to change will capitalize on that transition. And while immigration is hardly the panacea, I know that increasing immigration to the country would help the economy to operate at full steam, and in turn, it would solidify the position of the country in the world. So it's one of, let's position ourselves in the time that we're living and the importance that immigration has to help the United States operate at full steam.
I think those are wise final words. Well, Arturo, anything you're working on at the forum in the next few months that you want to plug, and where can listeners follow your work?
Oh man, there are multiple fronts every day that seem to open. So we are now leading advocacy efforts in Florida, Texas, and Washington D.C. As always, our priorities, I guess, remain the same. Creating legislative solutions for dreamers and expanding other legal migration pathways to have a robust economy and strong social tissue. If you're interested in engaging with the work that we do, we produce a number of resources that you and your readers might find interesting. You can register to our daily newsletter and the weekly legislative bulletin. You can do that at our webpage, immigrationforum.org. Also, you can follow us on Twitter, and we recently started our TikTok channel. So that's been fun.
How's that going?
Man, it's going. It's fun to just be able to have fun and do fun videos. So we're in the learning curve still. At least I am. But the communications department of our organization is doing wonders with our poor acting skills.
Oh, that's awesome. I think TikTok is quickly becoming I know there's some larger news surrounding it, but it is a very helpful tool, and there are a lot of people on TikTok that are not elsewhere, either on the internet or other social media channels, and it's a very helpful tool to communicate and share news.
It really is. So follow us and judge for yourselves. How are we doing there?
Well, I highly recommend everyone check out everything Arturo just referenced. We'll be sure to put links for all of that in the show notes. But Arturo, we really appreciate you coming on today. It was really a pleasure to get the chance to pick your brain and hear your thoughts on the current climate. And we hope to have you back soon.
Finn, Eric, the pleasure was all mine. I would be happy to come back.
Thank you, Arturo.
Take care.
Hey everyone, thank you for tuning in to Immigration and Mobility Decoded. If you watched this video on YouTube and you enjoyed it, please hit the like button and consider subscribing to the Envoy Global YouTube channel for more content like this. Otherwise, please follow us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks everyone.